All right, buckle up, everyone, because we're about to take a deep dive into some seriously complex philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
You guys sent in a ton of readings about propositional attitude reports.
Right.
Basically how we talk about beliefs, desires, fears, all that fun stuff about what's going on in people's minds.
Yeah.
It's actually way trickier than you might think to accurately explain what someone else is thinking, especially, if they're wrong about something.
Yeah.
We've even got a classic philosophical puzzle starring Superman himself.
Oh, nice.
Plus, we're going to tackle that big question. Can babies and animals actually have beliefs if they don't have language?
I spent way too much time thinking about these things, and I'm so ready to unpack it all with everyone.
Perfect.
Okay, so let's jump right in with this Superman puzzle.
Okay.
It's called the Frege puzzle, am I right?
Yeah, you got it. The Frege puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And it really shows you how tricky it can be to talk about beliefs.
Okay.
So picture Lois Lane.
Okay.
She believes Superman is strong, which, fair enough.
Makes sense. But here's the thing. She doesn't believe Clark Kent is strong.
Oh, right.
And of course, they're the same guy.
Yeah. So how can she have these two totally opposite beliefs about the exact same person?
Right.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you put it that way.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how we even form beliefs to begin with.
Totally.
So how do philosophers even try to explain this whole mess?
Well, there are two main camps, like two teams.
Okay.
You got your Phrygians, named after Gottlob Frege, the philosopher.
Right.
And then you've got your Russellians.
Okay, so what do the Phrygians say?
Well, they say that Lois actually has different modes of presentation, that's their fancy term, for Superman and Clark Kent.
Modes of presentation.
It's like she's got these separate mental files in her brain.
Oh.
One labeled Superman, filled with images of him flying around, being super strong.
Yeah.
And another file labeled Clark Kent. This one's all about being mild-mannered, a bit clumsy. Even though both files are about the same dude in reality, the way she thinks about them, the info attached to each file is different.
So for Phrygians, it's not really a contradiction because she has two separate thoughts based on these different mental files.
Exactly. Now, the Russellians, they come at it from a whole other angle.
Okay, what do they say?
Well, they argue there's only one proposition, one basic truth at play. Superman Clark Kent is strong.
Okay.
Like saying water is wet, same truth whether you're talking about a puddle or the ocean.
Right, I get that.
But then how do they explain why Lois believes one version of the guy is strong and the other one isn't?
Yeah, that's the tricky part, right?
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Some Russellians, they're called naive Russellians, they say the difference is all about pragmatics, not the actual meaning.
Pragmatics. Okay, so what's that about?
It's like saying, John is sober today when John never drinks, ever.
Oh, I see.
It's technically true, but misleading, right?
Yeah, you're making a distinction where there isn't really one. So naive Russellians are basically saying Lois believes the same thing about Superman Clark Kent, but she's expressing it in different ways.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Different ways of presenting the same underlying belief, not different beliefs themselves.
But I don't know, doesn't that feel a bit too simplistic?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, there's this real clash in what Lois believes. She's not just being misleading. She genuinely seems to hold these contradictory views about Superman Clark Kent.
You've hit on a major criticism of those naive Russellians.
Yeah.
It just doesn't capture that real feeling of cognitive dissonance. Like, yeah, something's not computing.
Right.
If it's just pragmatics, why does it feel so wrong to say Lois believes Clark Kent is strong?
Exactly.
And that's where other more nuanced theories come in, like contextualism.
Contextualism. Okay, what's that all about?
Contextualists, they emphasize how the context of what's being said really shapes the meaning. They argue that when we report what someone believes, there might be these hidden elements, things that aren't said out loud, but about how that person is actually thinking.
Oh, interesting.
Two philosophers, Crimmins and Perry, they call these unarticulated constituents.
Unarticulated constituents.
They're not explicitly stated, but they're there, lurking in the background, influencing how we understand the belief being reported.
So it's like all those unspoken assumptions we make in conversations.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
Let me give you an example. Imagine someone says he was president.
Okay?
Well, who he refers to totally depends on what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about Bill Clinton's thoughts?
Right.
Or George Bush's thoughts?
Totally different.
Same words, completely different meanings depending on the context.
This is making me realize how much we just take for granted in conversations.
Right.
We're constantly figuring out meaning based on context without even realizing it.
It's amazing how much our brains do behind the scenes.
So how does this all apply back to Lois and Superman?
Well, contextualists would say that the sentence, Lois believes he is strong,
Yeah,
can mean totally different things depending on who he refers to for Lois in her mind.
right.
When she thinks Superman, it triggers one set of ideas. When she thinks Clark Kent, it's a whole other set of associations. And that leads to different interpretations of her belief.
So contextualism is saying that to really understand someone's beliefs, you have to consider their own unique understanding and associations.
Exactly. It's not just about whether the belief is objectively true or false. It's about how that person is representing the world in their own mind.
This is making me rethink how I talk about beliefs.
That's wild, isn't it?
It's way more complicated than I ever realized.
Totally. It seems like even the simplest statements about beliefs are actually layered with all this complexity. It's fascinating, right? It really shows you how intricate human thought and communication are.
It really is.
So, are there any parts of these theories that you're curious about, or should we jump into some more of these belief puzzles?
You know, I'm really curious about how all of this applies to the question of whether animals can think.
Oh, that's a great question.
After all, they don't have language like we do, so
Yeah.
can we even talk about them having beliefs?
That's a fantastic point, and it takes us even deeper into this rabbit hole.
I'm ready if you are.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's get into this whole animal minds thing.
Okay.
Can creatures who don't use language like we do, can they actually have beliefs?
It's a really tough question, and it forces us to think hard about what belief even means.
Right, because how can you believe something, like a sentence, if you don't even have language?
Exactly. And we talked about that philosopher W.V. Quine earlier. He had this funny take on it.
Oh, yeah.
He compared it to calling a prehistoric ocean current, way back before clocks even existed. He compared it to calling it clockwise.
Right.
Obviously, there were no clocks back then, but that doesn't mean the current wasn't moving in a specific direction.
I remember that analogy, but it always felt a little bit like he was avoiding the real question. We don't usually say that ocean currents believe they're moving clockwise.
Right.
It feels like it's just a completely different category of thing.
Exactly. It's a different type of thing altogether.
Okay, so how do we make sense of this? Like if I believe, for example, that my dog believes there's food in his bowl,
Yeah.
how would I put that into a sentence that my dog believes, in his dog language?
That's a really good point. It's like we're trying to translate a feeling into a code that doesn't even exist.
Right.
It makes you wonder if we're just imposing our human way of thinking onto animals.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, it's crucial to consider that.
So maybe instead of trying to figure out what sentence does the dog believe,
Mm-hmm.
we should be asking, what's going on inside the dog that's making him act this way?
Exactly.
Like we're trying to understand a different kind of intelligence,
Right.
not just a less developed version of our own human intelligence.
I think that's a really helpful way to think about it.
This is definitely giving me a lot to think about,
Me too.
especially for the next time I'm hanging out with my dog.
Right.
But before we totally wrap up this whole animal minds thing, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, that Mark Richards' steamroller problem.
Oh, yeah, the steamroller.
That one really messed with some of those simpler theories about belief, didn't it?
It did.
Can you remind us what that was all about again?
Absolutely. So the steamroller problem, it throws a wrench into some of those simpler theories about how we report beliefs.
Okay.
Picture this. Sally's on the phone with Bill, totally clueless that Bill is actually standing in a phone booth right outside her window.
Oh, no.
As she's chatting away, she sees this steamroller heading straight for that phone booth.
Oh, my God.
And she thinks, oh no, that person's about to get flattened.
That's terrifying.
Right. But the puzzle is that Sally's thought is definitely about Bill, even though she doesn't realize it's him.
Right.
So can we really say Sally believes Bill is about to be flattened?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's the whole heart of the problem. On the one hand, her thought is totally about Bill, even if she's not consciously aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if you asked her straight up, do you believe Bill is about to be flattened? She'd be like, no way.
Yeah, of course you would.
Right. So it seems like saying yes or no doesn't really capture the whole picture of what's going on in her mind.
Right.
So how do different philosophical theories try to handle this kind of wacky scenario?
How do they explain it?
Well, those naive Russellians we talked about, they'd say that because Sally is technically thinking about Bill, the statement Sally believes Bill is about to be flattened is true, even though it's misleading.
But we already talked about how that explanation feels kind of weak, right?
Like, just doesn't account for that disconnect between what Sally consciously believes and what's actually happening in her mind.
It does feel like there's this mismatch.
Yeah, like something's missing from the explanation.
And this is where contextualism comes in to save the day.
Exactly. Remember those unarticulated constituents and how important context is?
Yeah.
Well, in Sally's case, her not knowing that Bill's the guy in the phone booth creates this specific context
Right.
that affects how we understand her belief.
Okay.
So while it might be technically true to say Sally believes the person in the phone booth is about to be flattened,
Yeah.
it's not really accurate to say Sally believes Bill is about to be flattened.
I see. I see.
Because for her, in that moment, they're two separate things.
That makes a lot of sense. Contextualism seems way better at handling these tricky situations than some of the other series.
Yeah, it gives you more flexibility when someone's internal understanding doesn't line up with what's actually happening.
It's like it's highlighting how understanding someone's beliefs isn't just about the facts. It's about seeing the world through their eyes.
Exactly. It's a reminder that beliefs are totally tied to individual perspectives.
Which leads us to an even bigger question.
Yeah.
If our beliefs are so wrapped up in how we see the world, what does that mean for truth itself?
Whoa, that's a big one.
Is truth objective, or is it relative to each person's point of view?
That's a huge question, and I'm not sure I have the answer.
Me either.
But this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about
Same here.
beliefs, truth, and how we even talk about these things.
Well, I'm feeling way more philosophically informed after this conversation, that's for sure.
I'm glad.
But before we completely wrap up, are there any other brain-bending puzzles or theories about propositional attitude reports that we should touch on?
There are tons. We've only scratched the surface of this whole philosophical world,
I know, right?
but maybe we should save those for another deep dive.
Yeah, good idea.
In the meantime, why don't we take a minute to sum up some of the key things we've learned
Yeah, let's do a little recap.
about propositional attitude reports and all the challenges they throw at us?
That sounds like a great plan. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back to summarize some of the main points and leave our listeners with something to really chew on. All right, we're back, and wow, my brain is still buzzing from all these ideas about propositional attitude reports. I mean, we've covered so much, from Superman and his secret mental files to the mysteries of animal minds.
It's pretty amazing, right? How this topic that seems so simple at first can lead to these huge philosophical questions about language and thought and even like the nature of truth itself.
That's what I love about these deep dives. It's not just about, learning facts. It's like we're actually stretching our brains, figuring out how our minds work and how we make sense of everything around us.
Yeah, totally. It's all about nurturing that curiosity,
Yeah.
and realizing how much depth there is to even the most everyday stuff.
Exactly. And speaking of depth, I think we should go back to that big thought-provoking question you asked earlier,
Okay.
about whether truth is subjective, if our beliefs are so tied up with our own individual perspectives.
Ah, yes. The classic showdown. Relativism versus objectivism.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's a question that's been bugging philosophers forever. It's at the heart of epistemology. That's like the study of knowledge.
Right, right. So for relativists, truth is basically whatever you make it.
Kind of, yeah. They say there's no single right way to see the world, just different interpretations based on your own experiences and biases.
But doesn't that mean anything goes then? Like, if everyone's perspective is equally valid, how do we even decide what's actually true?
That's a big criticism of relativism, for sure.
And that's where objectivists jump in.
Exactly. They're holding on to this idea that there's a reality out there, independent of our minds, a way things really are, even if we don't perceive them correctly. So for them, objective truths exist no matter what we happen to believe about them.
So an objectivist would say, Lois Lane is just plain wrong to believe Clark Kent isn't strong.
Yeah.
The truth is, I is strong no matter how she sees him.
Exactly. For objectivists, truth is truth, regardless of our individual minds and interpretations.
Man, both sides make good points.
They do.
It's like this debate cuts to the core of how we understand the relationship between our minds and the world.
For sure.
Relativism acknowledges how powerful our individual experiences are, while objectivism gives us a sense of being grounded in some kind of shared reality.
And that's exactly why this debate keeps philosophers coming back for more.
Yeah,
There's no simple answer, no single viewpoint that captures the whole complexity of truth and knowledge.
So it's an ongoing exploration, all thanks to the power of philosophical thinking.
Totally. It's a good reminder that sometimes the best questions are the ones that don't have neat and tidy answers.
Right.
They force us to think critically, to question what we assume, and to have open conversations.
Well said. And in a way, that brings us right back to these propositional attitude reports.
It was.
They're not just about stating facts. They're about navigating this whole tangled web of language, thought, perspective, and, truth.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has seriously opened my eyes to how much is going on beneath the surface of even the simplest statements about beliefs.
It's eye-opening, isn't it?
I feel like I'll never look at a belief report the same way again.
That's great to hear. It's all about cultivating that awareness and realizing just how much depth there is to everyday communication.
Yeah.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole universe of philosophy out there waiting to be discovered.
I'm excited to keep exploring. And to everyone listening out there, I hope this deep dive has sparked your own philosophical curiosity. Remember, the world is full of mind-bending puzzles, and sometimes the most rewarding ones are the ones that don't have easy answers.
So keep thinking, keep exploring, and keep those brains active.
Until next time, happy philosophizing.
Happy philosophizing.
And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We'll see you on the next episode, where we'll tackle another thought-provoking topic. Stay curious, everyone.